In 1799, during the Napoleonic campaign in Egypt, an old fort close to the town of Rashid was being repaired by the French occupiers. During the repairs of Fort Julian, a French officer, Pierre-François Bouchard, discovered an unusual stone that had been used as part of the fort's original construction. The stone contained a 196 BC decree written in 3 different languages: Ancient Egyptian, both hieroglyphs and demotic scripts, and lastly, Ancient Greek. This incredible discovery finally allowed scholars and historians just a few years later to transcribe the ancient languages, and was the key to unlocking ancient Egyptian culture and history as they had previously been lost to the histories of time. Join me now as we explore the fascinating history of the Rosetta Stone on History for Granite. I'm sorry, is this the right script? I mean, this is the wrong channel. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to my channel. I'm MTP, my turning point, or in this case, my teaching point. And this is my Rosetta Stone for guitarists. In this video, we will fill in this chart with various languages to create a single Rosetta Stone that will unify for you the following concepts. Modes, this is the primary focus of the chart, but as a result of learning modes, you will also learn the following: scale construction, scale shapes, how chords relate to scales, chord construction, fretboard map, or how to use the mode scale shapes to play anywhere on the fretboard, and some additional little extras that I think will unify a couple of different things even better. So let's dive straight in, but first let's sort out some basic admin and housekeeping. Who is this video for? Ultimately, it's for anyone. Beginners, intermediates. For myself, I fall into the long-time self-taught players looking to fill in knowledge gaps. The skill level and equipment you need, no skill level is required for this at all. As long as you can play some basic chords competently and you enjoy learning and you have a guitar, that's literally all you need. In the examples I'm going to use, it is E standard tuning. So that's from low to high, E, A, D, G, B, E. All the scale charts that we are going to fill in on the Rosetta Stone chart, they all follow the same pattern. It is like looking at your guitar fretboard from the top down, just like the photograph on the left, and the low E string is on the bottom and the high E string is on the top. So without further ado, let's start filling in this Rosetta Stone and unify some concepts together. There are 12 notes in Western music, or traditional Western music. Other cultures have got microtonal notes in between these notes. But for the vast majority of pop music, classical music, this is the arrangement of notes. An octave is 12 notes. Scales commonly have 7 notes, and they must have 1 letter each. You can't double up on letters. So let's go into Illustrator and start filling in the Rosetta Stone. To fill in our Rosetta Stone, we are going to be using the C major scale purely because that is how all formal instruction begins, because C major has no sharps or flats. And on a keyboard, that would mean when you're beginning, you only need to play the white keys. You don't need to play any black keys, and you don't have to deal with sharps or flats. So for the purely visual representation, we are going to be using the C major scale for this. So let's start. These are the notes of the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. I'm back to C. So that's great on its own. The intervals are very important. So this is what makes a scale, any scale, sound the way it does. It's the intervals between the notes. So for a major scale, the intervals are a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step. A whole step is 2 frets between the notes. So a whole step is 2 frets up or 2 frets down. A half step is 1 fret up or down. That's it. So we've got our notes. That's the first ring. Now, the second thing we need to know then is, well, I've got these notes. What can I play them over? What's the relationship between a scale and the chords I can use to play with that scale? How does that relationship work? So chords are built in a specific way. You'll hear the word triad, and a basic chord is a triad, and a triad is the root note, in our case C, the third note in the scale, in our case an E, and the 5th note. So a triad is built of the root, the 3rd, and the 5th interval. There is a 4th note then, which you create 7th chords out of, and that's the 7th note in the scale. And what you do is you go through each note and you take the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th each time. So you go one at a time, and you count 1, 3, 5, 7 for each note in the scale. And these will build the chords of that scale. So if we start at C, C is the 1, and then we count to the 3rd. So 1, 2, 3. So our 3rd note is E, and then our 5th note from C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is G. So our first triad is C, E, and G, and then the 7th note is B. But the triad, C, E, and G, will give us a C major chord, a C major triad. If you add the 7, so if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's a B note, that will give us a C major 7. Now we do the same exercise, but we start on the 2nd note of the scale, D, and that becomes our 1. So we got D is the 1 note. So then we count to 3, 1, 2, 3. So we've got F, and then we count 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we've got A. So we've got D, F, and A as our triad, and then our 7th note on top is the C. So that gives us a D minor triad. D, F, and A is a D minor triad. And then if you add the 7th note, the B on top, we've got a D minor 7. Now we repeat and we start on E. So E is our 1, 1, 2, 3. We've got E, G, and B. So that's our triad. And C would be our, D would be our 7th note. So we've got E, G, and B. That gives us an E minor triad, an E minor chord. And then when you add the 7th note on top, you've got an E minor 7. And then you just repeat this process, going through each of the remaining notes. F, A, and C would be the next triad. G, B, and D would be the next triad. And then B, D, and F would be the last triad. And then what you end up with, we've got an F major chord with an F major 7 as the 7th chord. Then we've got a G major chord with a dominant G7 chord. And we'll go through these later, the 7s, and what the different ones mean. And then the next chord in the C major scale would be A minor and A minor 7th. And then we've got a B diminished and then a B diminished 7 chord. So these are the chords of the C major scale made up from the notes of the C major scale. So when you're creating a triad, you take each note of the scale and you go through them one at a time, and you take the 1, the 3, and the 5, and the 7. And then you just go around each time for each note, and this creates your chords. So that's our second ring of the Rosetta Stone filled in. Something to understand about this chart now is that this is immutable, unchanging. These chord names and this chord layout does not change regardless of what scale you plug into this system. So for example, let me just change something very quickly. I've now changed from the scale letters to the scale degrees, basically. So we've got the Roman numerals instead of the letters. Hopefully, this will change the way you think about this a little bit, and you'll now understand that regardless of what scale I plug in here, the chords stay exactly the same, irrelevant of the major or minor scale I put into this. If we go back to the letters, you will often hear that C major and A minor are relative to each other in that they share the same notes. And we can prove that because if we, instead of starting on C like we did, if we come over here and start on A, and we did the same exercise of taking the 1st, 3rd, 5th and 7th note of each note as we move around the circle to build our chords, we will get exactly the same results. So if we went A, 1, 1, 2, 3 to C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to E, A, C and E makes an A minor chord. I haven't changed anything. If I count the 7th and I go to get the 7th note, which is G, that gives me an A minor 7. Move on to the B note and do the same exercise. B, 1, 2, 3 to D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to F, B, D and F gives me a B diminished chord. And then add in the A as the 7th and I get a B diminished 7. So relatively, everything here is exactly the same for C major and A minor. And this is exactly the same regardless of what major or minor scale I put in here. The chords will always be exactly the same. So that's the relationship between a scale and its chords. So now that information is kind of hard-coded into the chart. If we start on C, that is our major scale. But if we start those same string of notes on A, that's our relative minor scale. So A minor, C major. And the scales for those, the scale patterns for those scales are now shown in the outer ring. So the colours relate to this segment of the chart. So if we started on A, an A minor, if we started in this segment, then A, the orange notes are our root notes, the 1, and then the B is our second degree of the scale, and so on and around. If we start on C for C major, then red becomes our root note, green is now our second degree in the scale, E is the cyan, and so on. So the colours are specific to where you start on the chart. They're not related to the letter or the note in the scale, because if I change this back to Roman numerals, regardless of what scale we put on this chart, so if, for example, I was to put in D major and we'd start on D in the major segment, and we ran through the D major notes. Then the red notes in the scale diagrams would be D. So you can see that the D on the relative minor is in those positions, but the D note is in the root note positions on the major. So I just want to point out that the colours are specific to the note in each segment, and this becomes critical and really important when we move on to the next language, which is modes. Let's quickly just touch on seventh chords. There are three types of seventh chords. There's a major 7, a minor 7, and a dominant 7. When you just see the chord name with a 7 next to it, that means a dominant 7. So this is the major scale. And you can see we've got the root. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, back to root. A major 7th is always 1 fret behind the octave root. So a 7th is always a half step down from the octave. A minor 7 is always 2 or a whole step behind the octave. And a dominant 7 is a major chord with a minor 7th. So let's pop into Guitar Pro and I will show you some traditional chords that are examples of all three of those. So this is Guitar Pro, and I've set up an A minor chord, an A minor 7, an F major 7, a G, and a G dominant 7, or a G7 with a dominant 7. So as you can see, the A minor, the octave is that note there. So you've got root, 5th, octave, minor 3rd, 5th. The minor 7th, you've taken this finger off, you've gone 2 steps back to an open string to play the G, which is the 7th note of the A minor scale. So a minor 7th note is always 2 steps behind the octave. The F major, this is your traditional F major chord. You'll usually bar your first finger across those 2 strings. The F major 7, a major 7, is 1 fret behind. So you take your first finger off the first fret and you'd leave the E string ring open in this particular chord. So a major 7 is always 1 fret down from the octave. This is a G major chord. You've got G, the root, the B is the major 3rd, you've got the 5th, the root, the major 3rd, and the root again. So it's a 2 octave chord, essentially. A dominant 7 is a major chord with a minor 7th on it. You'll notice here that we've gone from the 3rd fret there, and we've gone down 2 frets, or a whole note. So a dominant 7th is a major chord with a minor 7th, or a 7th that is a whole step behind the octave. And that's pretty much it. So let's recap this first language. There's 12 notes in an octave. There's 7 notes in a scale. Chords within a scale are created using the 1, 3, 5, and 7 notes of each note within the scale. Every major scale has a relative minor scale that uses the same 7 notes. And this is the most important thing in this entire lesson. The colours used in this Rosetta Stone chart are dynamic, and they are not this. They are not static colours assigned to a particular note. If this is what you have in your head, you need to erase that immediately and forget it. The colours used in my chart are dynamic. They are not fixed like the stickers you would put on a fretboard. These colours relate to the notes we plug in to this section of the chart. So these colours relate to their particular segment or cheese wedge. They have nothing to do with a particular note. If we plugged in C sharp major into this, these colours would relate to the notes in C sharp major or its relative minor, depending on where we started and where the 1 was in this circle. Because the only thing that moves in this chart are the Roman numerals, and that will be covered in the next section. Everything in this chart is fixed, but the colours relate to whatever you put in these 7 note segments. They are not related to a specific note or a specific key. That needs to be made absolutely clear, because that is crucial to understanding this chart. Let us imagine, if you will, for a moment, that we are in a classroom. We're in a music lesson, and the teacher has just started explaining what I've explained already. The teacher's made the relationship between major and minor, and the kids, he's just paused briefly and he just scans across the classroom, and most of the kids are bored. They're not interested in music. They don't want to be there. Some look really confused. They don't quite get it. There's one kid, somewhat in the middle, got a furrowed brow, deep in thought, slowly raises his hand, and the teacher prompts him to ask the question. I say, "Sir, if we can start on C, but we can also start on A and use the same notes, does that mean that we can start anywhere in the circle with the same notes and get the same chords and the same shapes?" And the teacher smiles, because he knows he's found a student he's going to be able to teach this year. Okay, let's try and explain the classroom scenario we just ran through. Modes are taking the notes in a major scale, and instead of starting on the root note, we start on a different note within the scale. So we've got 7 notes in our scale. So therefore, we've got 7 modes or configurations, if you want to think of it as a configuration. So what the child's saying is, well, we've got these 7 notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And if we start on the first note, C, Ionian major, we get a C major scale. But if we start on the 6th note of the scale, we get its natural minor scale, A minor. Well, logically then, if we started on the D note and went and played the exact same notes, we would get something different. And if we started on E and went through the 7 notes and played those, we'd get something different again. And the logic is absolutely sound. And these are what modes are. So they each have a name from ancient Greek. And let me just fill in these on. The first mode is Ionian. That's mode 1. The second mode of a major scale is called Dorian. The third mode of a major scale is called Phrygian. The fourth is called Lydian. The fifth is Mixolydian. The sixth, is Aeolian or minor, the minor mode that we've already covered. And then the last and 7th mode is called Locrian. Now, we've got the scale shape for a major scale starting on the first note, and we've got our minor scale shape when we start on the 6th note. And what we've got now is, this is the scale shape for Dorian. If we started on D, and then if we started on Phrygian, on E, this is the Phrygian scale shape, and then this is Lydian, Mixolydian, and finally Locrian. So these are our scale shapes for each mode. So from now on, I am going to stop using letters and I am going to switch over to coloured circles. This is basically the proper method, or the final sort of fixed form for this Rosetta Stone chart. The colours relate to the mode and the root note of that particular mode. This will all be explained going forward. But for now, and I don't because I want to use this going forward, because this is the correct way to use it. And I don't want people to incorrectly associate a colour with a particular letter, especially as we're predominantly using C major as our example kind of scale. I don't want people to make the mistake of associating each colour with a letter from the C major scale. So this is what we're going to be using going forward. So now that we've got our modes in place and our names and our scale shapes for each mode, the first thing to point out is that the chord for the mode defines whether that mode is a major mode or a minor mode or a diminished mode. So the chord in the segment relates to that particular note, depending on what scale you plug into this. But obviously major, Ionian major, is a major scale. So its home, its root chord, is a major chord. So when a chord progression resolves back to the root chord, to the home chord, you get that lovely resolution of feeling like you've come home, and things go, well, we're back home again. Other chords within a chord progression create tension, take you off somewhere else. But when you resolve back to the one chord, to the home chord, there should be a sense of almost relaxation, of like, I've come home. And you'll probably sense that, even if you don't know that sort of from the theory side, you listening to music, you will sort of subconsciously understand that sensation of when a chord progression goes round and goes back to the home chord, to the root chord. You get that sense of coming home, of relaxing, of like sinking down into a nice comfy chair. So Ionian is a major mode. Dorian and Phrygian are minor modes and have a minor sound to them. Lydian and Mixolydian are then major modes. Aeolian is obviously a minor mode. It's the natural minor scale and the minor relative to the Ionian major. And Locrian is like the bad sheep of the family. It's the diminished mode. And we'll get into that. And I've got examples of all of these. But so what you'll notice is we've got 3 major modes: Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. We've got 3 minor modes: Aeolian minor, Dorian, and Phrygian. And then we have this last 7th mode, Locrian, which is a diminished mode. So what do these sound like? How can I give you sort of examples of what this sounds like? So what I'm going to do next, the easiest way to show you the differences between each mode and how each mode sounds compared to the others, is to basically play them in the exact same key. So up next, I'm going to show you 7 short 1-minute examples of playing each of these modes in C. So we're going to be playing C major, we're going to be playing C Dorian, C Phrygian, C Lydian, C Mixolydian, C minor, and C Locrian. Underneath those, and this is the one thing that I find very frustrating when I see other YouTubers talking about modes, is they'll play a scale shape and say, oh, this is Dorian, or this is Lydian, without any chord underneath that scale. You have no context whatsoever for what that mode actually sounds like. So in these examples I'm going to play you next, the major modes, there's going to be a keyboard underneath playing a C major scale because they're major modes. And then the 3 minor modes, I'm going to have a keyboard playing a C minor chord underneath to give you the context. And then the C Locrian example is going to be a C diminished chord underneath. That is the key to understanding modes, is you need a chord underneath to give you the context, to give you the flavour. Because if you just play the scale, it's almost meaningless. It doesn't capture. You need the chord to give you the context. So up next is 7 examples, all in C, so that you can actually hear what each mode sounds like. Welcome to the MTP modes family tree. So we've just heard all the 7 modes, so that you can hear what each mode actually sounds like. And the family tree poster, which is going to be free to download in the description along with everything else, is going to show us why the modes sound the way they do. So these are the 2 parent cats. We've got a white cat for the major side of the family, and then we've got a black cat for the minor side of the family. So if we start on major, the major cat is the parent that's happy and uplifting and brings joy. Major is the happy sounding scale, and it's made up of the root, the second, the major third, the perfect fourth, and the perfect fifth, a major sixth, and a major seventh. A perfect fourth, a perfect note, is a note that's the same in the major scale as it is in the minor scale. So the 4th note in the major and minor scale and the 5th note in the major and minor scale are the same. They don't change, and they were then considered perfect. A major third and a major sixth are a whole step away from their 2nd and 5th notes, a whole step. So if we played the major third on the low E string, it would be 2 frets up here. So you'd have a whole step and a whole step. And the same goes for the major sixth. If we played the 4, 5 and the 6 on the same string, we'd have a whole step up 2 frets and a whole step up 2 frets. So 2 frets up is 1 fret back on the next string up from the first. So you can see that the major third on the A string is 1 fret behind the root note. And then you can see that the major sixth is 1 fret behind the 4th. Whereas on the minor scale, a minor third and a minor sixth are only 1 fret in front of the 5th and the 2nd. And that's why they're able to land on the same string in the scale shapes. So we've got a major third, and then a major 7th, as we've discussed, is 1 fret or a half step below the root octave. So this is our major parent. If we then look at Mixolydian, the happy child, the child that suffers from the blues, mostly happy with a melancholic streak. So Mixolydian is exactly the same as the major scale. It just has 1 note difference, which is a minor 7th. You'll see that the 7th note is a whole step or 2 frets behind the root octave. So it's a major scale with just 1 note difference, and it's got a minor 7th, and that's what makes Mixolydian sound the way it does. And then Lydian is the daydreamer child, walks around with an ethereal glow. Lydian's got that airy, mystical kind of quality and the reason it sounds like that is Lydian has this sharp 4th note. So again, if you look at the 3 of them, there is only 1 note that makes Mixolydian and Lydian different from the major scale. So if you want your melody, your song, your vocal line, your guitar solo to sound like Mixolydian or Lydian, you have to emphasize that 1 note. Otherwise, if you even miss that 1 note, it's just going to sound like the major scale. To really emphasize Lydian and Mixolydian, you really need to bring to the front that 1 note difference to really bring out the quality of the scale's sound and feel. So if we move over to the minor scale, as we've discussed, we've got the root, the 2nd, the minor 3rd, which is only a half step up from the 2nd note, the perfect 4th and the perfect 5th, because they're the same as the major scale. And then we've got the minor 6th and the minor 7th. So the minor 3rd, the minor 6th and the minor 7th, when compared to the major scale, are just 1 fret behind their major equivalents. So, and that's pretty much it. Minor 3rd, minor 6th, minor 7th. The minor 7th being a whole step behind the root octave. Minor is the parent that's sad and melancholic and brings tears. It's the sad key. It's the sad sounding scale. And obviously D minor is the saddest of all of those. Dorian is the child that suffers from the blues. Dorian is almost the minor twin, if you will, of Mixolydian. If you consider these twins, so Dorian is the child that suffers from the blues, mostly sad with an optimistic streak. So whereas Mixolydian had a minor 7th, Dorian has got a major 6th, and it's the major 6th that gives Dorian its noticeable sound, and that's why I think it's so popular a mode. So it's still got the minor 3rd and the minor 7th, but the 6th just moves up 1 fret from here to here, and we get a major 6th. And again, if you want Dorian to sound like Dorian, you really have to emphasize and push that major 6th in your melody or guitar solo. Phrygian is the child fascinated by pyramids and the Middle East. Again, Phrygian is the minor scale with a flat 2nd. So that 2nd degree, and that 2nd degree is that half step from the root to the 2nd, gives it that Middle Eastern, Egyptian sounding quality. And again, you really have to push. If you push the 1, 2, and then the 5 and the 6, you really do. That's the core Phrygian sound. So those are the 6 major and minor modes. There's one more, and that's Locrian. Locrian is the child both parents don't understand and think was swapped accidentally at the hospital at birth. Locrian doesn't play nice with others and doesn't have many friends. Locrian is the diminished mode, and diminished is, you'll hear diminished and augmented. So a diminished mode is where the 5 note, the 5th note, is moved down half a step or a semitone, and it's a flat 5. And then an augmented mode is where the 5th is moved up a semitone or 1 fret, and it's a sharp 5. But Locrian is a diminished mode, and it has the flat 2nd from Phrygian, but then it also has this flat 5. So rather than getting the really harmonically perfect sounding perfect 5th, your classic power chord on a guitar, you get this really dissonant flat 5 instead, which makes, and when you add that in with that flat 2nd, you get a really dissonant, some would say not very nice sounding scale and sound overall. And I hope that comes across on the example that I played. It's difficult to write a song in Locrian because the home chord, when your chord progression resolves back to home, it's supposed to make you feel like a sense of coming home and relaxing to start again. Locrian does the exact opposite. It takes you to a place of the most extreme dissonance and tension. So it's you really have to lean into that and almost go for like a horror vibe or a dark sort of metal song that's got that clean part in the verse that's all dissonant and diminished sounding before you go into like a killer chorus. So, but that's Locrian. That's the black sheep of the family with its flat 5 and its flat 2nd. So that's my family tree of modes that explains why the modes sound the way they sound. Okay, so far we've been using the C major scale as our example scale. And to stick with it for now, the Rosetta Stone gives you the scale, the chords within that scale, and the chord shapes that allows you to play anywhere on the fretboard. So in this example, we're playing the C major scale. So the Roman, I'm only going to use one Roman numeral from now on because I only want to highlight the root note and the root chord and the root and the actual mode we're playing in. So if there's a 1 here, then it stands to reason that we go clockwise around the chart. So that's our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So from now on, just for this, just to finish out this part of the video, I'll only be highlighting the 1 Roman numeral to highlight the root of what mode we're working in. So C major, C is our 1, and the chart tells you that the chords to use to play in C major, the 1 chord is C major or a C major 7. The 2 chord is a D minor or a D minor 7. The 3 chord is an E minor or an E minor 7. The 4 chord is an F major or an F major 7. The 5 chord is a G major or a G dominant 7, a G7. The 6 chord is an A minor or an A minor 7, and the 7 chord is a B diminished or a B diminished 7. So you can now write a song in C major and know what your chord progressions are. So probably the most common chord sequence in popular music is the 1-5-6-4 chord progression. So now this chart, you can easily identify what chords would fit in that. So you've got 1 would be the C major chord, the 5 would be a G major or a G7, 6 would be the A minor, and then 4 would be the F major. So this chart tells you everything you need to know to write a song in C major. Your home chord shape would be the major chord shape, and your root note would start on the low E string on the 8th fret, because the 8th fret on a standard tuned 6-string guitar is the C note. The 8th fret on the low E string is the C note. So we're playing in C. The red denotes the root chord, the root note. So in this example of C major, this chord, this scale shape would start on the 8th fret of the low E string. And that is where you could write your melody or your vocal line or a simple guitar melody, your hook. But if you wanted to play in a different part of the fretboard, and I'm going to cover this more in detail in the final part of the video, I'm only going to touch on it here. If you want to play in a different part of the fretboard, to move up the fretboard, you just move up to the Dorian shape. Because if you notice, the second note on the major scale is green, and if you just move up 2 frets to the 10th fret on the fretboard and play the Dorian shape, you're still actually playing in C major, but you've just moved to a different part of the fretboard. And if you want to play even higher, you can just move up to the 12th fret and play the Phrygian shape, and you're still playing in C major, playing underneath your C major chord progression, but you're now in a different part of the fretboard, still playing C major, just utilizing the Phrygian shape to play C major on that part of the fretboard. So all of this is interlinked. All of this is static depending on what scale you're pushing in. So let's change this now and let's use a different example. So we're going to get rid of the C major stuff. Let's say you're a metal player. You've got a baritone guitar, still a 6-string, but it's a baritone guitar and it's tuned to B standard. So that's E standard down tuned a 5th, basically. So we want to play in B and we want to play in Phrygian. We want to write a song that utilizes the heaviness of the low B string, and we want to write a cool kind of Egyptian, Middle Eastern, utilizing that Phrygian sound and that flat second. We want to get that Phrygian feel. So I want to write a song in B Phrygian. So Phrygian, the Phrygian segment now becomes my 1. That becomes my home working area. That's my home note, and that is my root chord. So B Phrygian starts on a B minor or a B minor 7. If we then, if you don't know the notes of the B Phrygian scale, take the Phrygian scale shape here, take the first 7 notes. So we're going to take the cyan, the blue, the magenta, orange, yellow, red and green. So we're just going to take the first 7 notes. Remember, take that shape and then take any fretboard map, and we want to just then find the B note on the low E string. So we've got B, C, D, E, F sharp, G and A. So again, all we've done, we've taken the first 7 notes of this Phrygian shape. We want to play in B. So we find the B on the low E string, and then we just apply that 7-note shape to the fretboard map to get the notes of B Phrygian. And then you just come back in. So we've got B, A, G. I should have gone the other way, but so now we've plugged in the notes of B Phrygian. As a consequence of this, you can now see that B Phrygian is the 3rd mode of G major, and it's also it's in the E minor family. So you've also learnt something now about B Phrygian's relationship to its major parent and its minor parent. So now, okay, now what's the note? What chords can I use? What chords can I utilize? So now you just look at the chord shapes. My home chord, my 1 chord is now B minor. My 2 chord is now C major. My 3 chord is now D major. My 4 chord is now E minor. My 5 chord becomes F sharp diminished. My 6 chord becomes G major. And my 7th chord becomes A minor. This is my home scale shape that we would play starting on the 7th fret of the low E string. So that's my home Phrygian shape here. If I wanted to, while playing our song in B Phrygian, if, for example, I was the lead guitarist and I wanted to move up the fretboard, then while you're playing in B Phrygian, if you just moved up the fretboard, if I wanted to just move up the fretboard again, so I'm starting on the 7th fret, 8, 9, so I'd move up to the 9th fret and I could play the Mixolydian shape. I'm still playing in B Phrygian. I'm just moving up the fretboard and utilizing the Mixolydian shape to play higher up the fretboard. So this is not only scale shapes for a particular mode, it's also the scale shapes that allow you to move up and down the fretboard. So if we're playing in B Phrygian and I want to move up the fretboard, I move clockwise and utilize the scale shapes. If I want to move down the fretboard, I go counterclockwise and I go backwards. These scale shapes allow you to move anywhere on the fretboard, but I'm going to cover that now in the last part. So I'm hoping that's like a kind of a light bulb moment for you to be able to write any song in any mode, in any key. So that concludes this portion of the video. We're now going to move on to the final part of the video, which deals more with the movement and using this chart as a fretboard map that allows you to play any key anywhere. Okay, welcome to part 3, the last part. We are getting there. This part is all going to be about movement and how to utilize the Rosetta sTone chart to help you move around the fretboard in any mode, in any key. But before we do that, we need to identify what scales we actually need to learn how to play. So you might be looking at the chart now thinking, well, okay, that's easy. I need to learn 7. There's 7 modes. I need to learn 7 scales. Well, not quite. Let's have a look at the Locrian and major mode scale shapes. Now, if you look at these two, if I was to overlay the Locrian scale on top of the major scale, they are identical. They are the exact same scale shape, except for this one note. The root note of the Locrian scale is the only difference between these two scale shapes. And the clue is here in the half step. There is only a half step difference between Locrian and Ionian. And it's this. This is the half step difference. So Locrian and Ionian share the exact same scale shape. So instead of having to learn 2 scale shapes, you only actually need to learn 1, and just remember that Locrian has this additional note at the start of its scale shape. The same is for Phrygian and Lydian. Again, if I was to overlay Lydian on top of Phrygian, they would be exactly the same, except that Phrygian has this half step first root note here, whereas Lydian does not. And again, it's that half step difference between Phrygian and Lydian in the scale that makes Phrygian and Lydian share exactly the same scale pattern. So again, you don't have to learn 2 different scale shapes. You only have to learn 1, and remember that Phrygian has this additional root note at the start of its version of the pattern. So what you end up with is you only actually need to learn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale shapes. And if we move over into the other poster that I'm going to make of it free to download, this is my other poster that I'm going to be making available. So the Locrian and Ionian major shape I call the Locrionian shape. So you only need to learn this one shape, and I point out here that Locrian only uses this note. Then there's the Dorian shape, and then we've got the Phrygian shape, which is Phrygian and Lydian, and again pointing out that only Phrygian uses this first note. Then we've got the Mixolydian shape, we've got the Aeolian minor shape, and then we come full circle back to the Locrionian shape at the start. Now, the dashed lines show you where the one shape shares the same set of notes with the next shape. And then the Dorian shape shares this set of notes with the Phrygian scale shape, and so on, and so on, and so on. So what this is telling you, this is showing you that you can move up and down the fretboard, and it's a way of showing you the shared notes and patterns, so that when you learn these scale shapes, you can start practicing then moving between them and seeing them as interconnected. So that's the whole purpose of this, is to show you the circular connectivity between the modes and the mode shapes, and how they can help you play in any mode, in any key, anywhere, just by utilising these 5 modal shapes. So that's why the circular nature of this chart is so important, because there is no start and there is no end. It's a circular continuity, and you define the starting location by what mode you want to play in, and then you can move up the fretboard by going clockwise from your home mode and your home scale shape, or you can move down the fretboard by going counterclockwise. So my first suggestion for starting to get the movement into your playing is to learn these five scale shapes, the modal scale shapes. And these shapes have been done for a reason that I will come on to. It's critical that these are the shapes, because they play a crucial role in something else that's coming up shortly. So let's stick with our B Phrygian example. So we want to write a song in B Phrygian. So the Phrygian mode is our one, is our root, is our home. So we know now that the chord progressions and the chords we can use are B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, G major, and A minor. So we now know we're playing in B Phrygian. So Phrygian is our home scale shape, and because we're playing in B, that means that Phrygian scale pattern is going to be here, starting on the 7th fret. So that's our home block, our Phrygian home block. Now, if I want to take my guitar solo or my little melody line up the fretboard, well, I know the notes. I know that on the low E string, I'm starting on the 7th fret, which is B. We now know that Phrygian and Lydian share the same space, the same box, because the Phrygian root note starts there, just a half step down from the Lydian one. So if I want to move up the fretboard, I need to go to the D note, which is the magenta coloured one there. And then we want to play in this box. So we know D is the 10th fret on the low E string. So that's where my Mixolydian box within B Phrygian. So I can utilise the Mixolydian box on the 10th fret and be playing in B Phrygian, because they're all the same notes. Conversely, if I wanted to go down the fretboard, well then Phrygian is on the 7th fret on B. The Dorian shape starts on the A note, which as we know is going to be the 5th fret on the low E string. So now, if I want to move down the fretboard, I can move down to A Dorian, and I'm still playing in B Phrygian. So there's 2 ways to think about modes. There's the songwriting theory part, where you understand that the modes are different arrangements of a major scale's notes, and how those chords relate, and how you build a chord progression out of your modal key and scale that you're in. But then the other way to think of your modes is your actual movement around the fretboard, and that it is a circular relationship, that this modal shape, when you're playing in a specific mode, like we are here in this example, B Phrygian, I want to go up the fretboard. Well, okay, I'll just go up to the Mixolydian scale shape on the D note on the 10th fret. And I can go up again to the 12th fret and play the minor shape. All of that allows me to flow up and down the fretboard, playing B Phrygian. So that's key to the outer part of this chart, is that not only is it giving you the scale shape for the mode you're playing, it gives you the entire fretboard map that you can freely move up and down the fretboard by utilising the shapes in the modes based on the key you're playing in. I hope that makes sense. If we change back to our C major example, so C is now our 1, our home, our root. Ionian major is now our root mode that we're playing in. So we're writing a song in C major. So we know that our chords that we can use are C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. So we can write our song using this inner section. We know that C is on the 8th fret of the low E string. So we know that this Ionian major scale pattern now starts on the 8th fret on the low E string. So that's our home box. Now, if I want to move up the fretboard, well, I can just go up to the 10th fret and play in the Dorian shape, and I'll still be in C major. If I want to go up even further to do a guitar solo and move my guitar solo up the fretboard, then I can just move up to the 12th fret and play in the E Phrygian box, and all the while I'll still be in C major. And conversely, if I want to go down the fretboard and move my solo or my melody line down the fretboard, then I just go down to the 7th fret for the the Locrian and Ionian share the same. So you'd actually go down to the 5th fret, the A note. So on the 5th fret, A, and you'd utilize the minor box on the 5th fret on the A note. And that allows you to move freely up and down the fretboard. So there's two examples there. B Phrygian would start on the 7th fret on the E string, and then C major, we would be starting on the 8th fret playing the major box, and then using the chart then to move up and down the fretboard freely. It just opens up the entire fretboard. So what I would suggest is learning these 5 modal shapes. These are the shapes that are going to allow you to play anywhere on the fretboard, in any key, in any mode. Learn the Locrionian shape for Ionian and Locrian. Learn the Dorian shape. Go away. Learn the Phrygian shape. Learn the Mixolydian shape, and learn the Aeolian minor shape. And then focus in then on the dotted line areas that show you how each shape then merges into the next shape, merges into the next shape. So what I would recommend is learn the shapes and then learn sliding up into the next shape and sliding back down into the previous shape. And then when you're comfortable with playing 2 shapes, add in a 3rd one and slide up into this shape and play in this box for a while, and then slide up into this box, into the Phrygian box, until you're really comfortable playing in 3 boxes, and then add in the Mixolydian shape, and then add in the minor shape, and then add in sliding up then into you've gone up an entire octave horizontally, and then become comfortable with these 5 shapes and move in between them, because this is ultimately about practice and more practice. So that's movement. Now, I said a few times that there's a reason that these scale shapes are the way they are. And if you're astute, you may have noticed that there's some empty gaps on some of these modes. And if I unhide those now, this is the reason. This is the completed Rosetta Stone chart. What you'll notice is I've now added in the pentatonic scale in all the modes. So if we zoom in on the major scale, what you'll notice is, actually, let's move back out again. You'll notice first that Lydian and Locrian don't have a pentatonic scale shape. This is because these modes don't form part of the 5 notes in the pentatonic scale. And if you turn the letters off on Locrian and Lydian, and you read the letters backwards from C, you'll notice that it spells caged. Now, I've never actually gone in depth on the caged system. I've not really watched any videos on it. I kind of get the gist of it, where they use the C-shaped chord, a G-shaped chord, a D-shaped chord, and an A-shaped chord, and an E-shaped chord, and there's this relationship. And I don't know how this relates to what I'm presenting here, but I understand that there is a caged system, but I just thought it was interesting to show you that. So let's get back to these shapes. If you remove the yellow and the dark blue dots from all of the modes that have the pentatonic shape, you'll notice why I've used the shapes that I've used. Because you now have the exact same pattern, the exact same scale shape, but you now have the pentatonic variant of the mode you're in. So you'll notice that the blue and yellow dots have been removed, the notes have been removed, and you now have the major pentatonic shape. And if we move to Dorian, we've now got the Dorian, or I think it would be box 2 pentatonic. But you know how, but what it actually is Dorian pentatonic. So this is the Dorian pentatonic scale shape. And this is the Phrygian pentatonic scale shape. And this is the Mixolydian pentatonic scale shape. And this is the classic kind of probably the first scale that every guitarist ever learns is the minor pentatonic scale shape. So what you ultimately have is 10 scale shapes to learn. You've got 5 modal shapes to learn: Locrionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian, and Aeolian minor. And then you have the Ionian major pentatonic shape, the Dorian pentatonic shape, the Phrygian pentatonic shape, Mixolydian, and the classic Aeolian minor pentatonic box. Something to point out, and I've drawn the dotted lines so that you can see the relationship between how one shape feeds into the next shape, feeds into the next shape, so that you should comfortably be able to just slide up and play from one box into the next and not be stuck in one area of the fretboard. If you've ever watched the John Mayer Equator video, and I'll put a screenshot of the thumbnail of that video, this is what he's talking about. This is exactly what he's talking about: the Mixolydian pentatonic shape and the classic minor pentatonic shape. This is the equator that he's talking about, and these two boxes are what he's talking about in that video. And if you've never related pentatonic to modes, well, hopefully this is like, wow. I don't know whether because I'm kind of doing this in my own little world and in my own little bubble, I don't know whether other guitarists make these connections. But these are the 10 shapes to be learned. And then you can play anything, anywhere with this one chart. Okay, so what I'll do now is I will actually play an example of playing in B Phrygian and then utilising the modal shapes to play up and down the fretboard. And I'll have the information at the top. And as I slide into the next shape or slide down into a previous shape, I'll show the part of the chart that where I'm using it at any given time as a sort of a visual example of using the chart to be able to move up and down the fretboard. That was our B Phrygian example of allowing or letting the chart tell you where to play anywhere on the fretboard. Now, there was a reason I started on the 2nd fret of the A string on that B note, because I wanted to demonstrate after the example how to know where to play when your root note isn't on the low E string, so you know your box based on the scale shapes on the chart. And there's a very easy way to do it. So we were playing, and it might be a case that the song you're playing in, you're playing a chord that is like a power chord that's on the A string. So you might be playing a B minor in our example, because B Phrygian is a minor mode. You might actually be playing a B minor chord in this area of the neck, and you might want to start in this area rather than in this B home area. So there's a very simple way of knowing which scale shape to use when your root note is on the A string instead of the low B string. And it's very straightforward. The difference between this B here and this F sharp here is a fifth. It's a fifth away. And we know that because if we go to this F sharp, that from that B to that F sharp is your classic power chord. It's the classic fifth interval. And if you just go down a string on the same fret, that's a fifth from this note on the A string. So we know that the F sharp on the E string is a fifth away from the B on the A string. So to work out what box scale shape is your home when your root note is on the A string, you just let the chart tell you and you count up 5. So B is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the chart is telling us that if our B note is on the A string, and we know it is here because the cyan root B note is on the A string there, that we just have to play the Locrian Ionian scale shape. That becomes our home when the B note we want to play is on the A string. So I'm in B Phrygian. This would be my B Phrygian home scale shape, but the B I want to start on, and this area is where I'm playing. So I just go up, count up 5, and then that tells me what scale shape to play in that area instead. And there's another way of seeing this as well. If I zoom in on the Phrygian scale, if we look at the bottom 3 strings, if we look at that scale pattern of half step, whole step, and then when we just take this string on its own, whole step, half step, and then whole step, half step. So you got that particular pattern there. It also informs the next 3 strings up. You'll notice, look, we're starting on that B note, and we've got the half step, whole step, and then the whole step, half step, whole step, half step. The reason the shape doesn't follow exactly then is because we've got this major third tuning between the G string and the B string, which means these notes have to shift up 1 fret. So these notes here have to move up 1 fret, which changes the shape of the scale shape then. But that's an easy way of knowing. If my root note is on the A string, just count up 5 segments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that tells you what scale shape to play in when your root note is on the A string instead of the low E string. Okay, we are going to close and complete part 3 of this video with just taking the movement side of things to the next step, which is 3 notes per string scale shapes. We're going to stick with the notes we're using just because it's convenient, but we're going to go back to the G as the 1. We're going to do this in kind of G major, and just because it's the 3rd fret on the fretboard is just a nice place to start to run up the fretboard with 3 note per string scale shapes. So we're gonna create a 3 note per string scale shape for every note in the G major scale. And we're going to do that by taking 2 adjacent shapes and borrowing the notes that we need from the 2 shapes that are adjacent to each other. And we're going to borrow the notes we need from each shape to make a 3 note per string scale shape. And hopefully this will make sense as we go along. So we're going to start with the Locrionian shape and the Dorian shape. So we're going to take these first two shapes and we're going to create a 3-note per string scale shape. And that's what this looks like. So this is 3 notes per string with the major scale shape, the Locrian Ionian scale shape, and then we're stealing this bit from the Dorian scale shape and these notes here. So what we do then, we're going to move up and we're going to use Dorian and the Phrygian scale shapes, and we're going to do the same thing. Basically, we're going to start, we started on G, and now we're going to start on A, on the 5th fret on A, and we're going to borrow the notes from Dorian and the Phrygian and create another 3-note per string, and that's going to look like this. So this is Dorian here and these notes, and then we're borrowing then from the Phrygian scale shape in this area here. And then we're basically going to repeat this. So those are your 3-note per string scale shapes, all built from the 5 modal shapes. So, I mean, you may already know some 3-note per string scale runs, but maybe never tied them to the modal shapes. And I think for a lot of guitar players, we are just shape based and we just learn shapes, but we don't really think about where they came from. But those are your 3 notes per string. Actually, I think I will just provide these shapes as another download poster in the description. And that's pretty much it. I will now close out the video with some like final thoughts and anything else I can think of now while I'm finishing off editing this video. Give a guitarist a music theory chart and they'll play for a day. Teach a guitarist everything about that music theory chart and they'll play for a lifetime. Me, today, 2nd of August, 2025. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. That is my Rosetta STone tutorial. That's a long ass 80 minutes. But everything you've seen in this tutorial will be a free download in the video description. I will be making the Rosetta STone chart freely available. I will be doing 3 different versions. I'll be doing the proper, this is the proper version with the coloured circles, but I will also be doing the Roman numeral version, and I'll be doing the C major alternative version as well. I'll make all 3 available as A1. These are actual A1 posters, and I've actually got one printed out. I did one as a test print, and I'll stick a picture of it in here now. I will also be making available the modes family tree with the cats, and I will be making available the 3 notes per string modal scale shapes and the Rosetta STone scale shapes as well. So all of this will be freely available to download from my Google Drive, links in the description. I will, obviously you can see here, if you do share this or print it off and you hang it up somewhere, once I've uploaded this video to YouTube, once it's finished, I will be adding a QR code to all the posters, so that if you do print it off, you can scan the QR code and it will take you straight to this video. Thank you so much for watching. You are now free to leave.